Hey everyone, this is Keith Baker. I am the host of the Dancing with Cancer podcast, where we talk about how to live an upbeat, joyful life in the middle of the cancer storm. Let's go. So several years ago, when I first got into teen ministry and first started working with teens, it was at a church with maybe 15 teens. And it was a good group of kids. We had great fun with them. But again, I was probably 20 years old myself. So I'm barely out of the teens myself. I was married. I got married at 18 again. And anyways, we're at this church doing youth ministry and having a lot of fun with the kids and teaching Bible. And one of the teens from one of the main families there at the church, the father passed away from cancer, died from cancer. And I remember at the time just hurting for this young man. I kind of wrestled with internally how I would have dealt with that at 15 years old. If I remember right, he was 14, 15, something of that nature. That my dad would die from cancer, how I would process that, how I would feel about that. And I remember hurting for this young man. But then a thought came to me that panicked me also. And that was, okay, what am I going to say to him the next time I see him, right? I'm the youth pastor or youth leader at that church. And on some level, I'm that teens pastor, if you will. And in theory, he's supposed to get words of wisdom from me, and I'm supposed to be there to comfort him and encourage him and point him towards God. And my mind was just going blank. And it was panic and like, okay, what do I say? And what if he asks me questions that I can't answer? Like, why did God allow this? Or why does God allow cancer? Or why would God take my father away? Hey, this is Keith Baker, the Dancing with Cancer, episode 66. Don't let what you don't know cause you to doubt what you do know. Episode. Thanks so much for coming and joining us today. And we're going to talk about some hard things and just look at life. Again, we try to be as real and as authentic as possible in these podcasts. And the fact of the matter is, in the real world, there are going to be times when you come across situations that hurt, and there are going to be times when there are going to be questions, quite frankly, you don't have an answer for, and you cannot either give an answer to someone else for, or you may not have an answer for yourself that is completely satisfactory. So the question then becomes, and I know I've had others challenge me sometimes, is, well, how can you believe in God if you can't answer these questions about God? Or if there are certain questions that are unanswered, how do you then rectify that? Or how do you still believe in God if you can't answer these questions? And my response to that would be simply that there are a lot of questions about life that we cannot answer, whether you believe in God or don't believe in God. In other words, I don't believe we use that same standard in other areas of our life, right? So the theory is that if I can't answer all the questions about God, then I shouldn't believe in God. But we don't use that same requirement in other areas of our life. For example, if there are questions that I can't answer about science, does that make science not true? Of course not. If there are questions that I can't answer about science, does that change how science works? Of course not, right? I can... Well, let's back up a little bit. There's a couple different reasons why I may not be able to answer questions, right? So there's I can't answer the question simply because I don't have the information currently to answer the question correctly. In other words, I'm simply not educated enough or knowledgeable enough to address a certain question, a certain answer. The second reason I may not be able to answer a question is legitimately there is no answer. Nobody has an answer for that question, right? So there's two different scenarios there. And I would argue that more often than not, it's because I simply don't have the information currently to answer the question. And that's okay. Because again, in every area of life, that's going to apply. So as an example, we all understand how gravity works. But if I could not explain to you how gravity works, would gravity stop working? No. Gravity is going to work whether I understand how it works or not. Whether I believe it works or I believe it doesn't work doesn't affect how gravity works. Gravity is going to work the same way, regardless of what I know, education-wise, what I believe in my heart to be true. Gravity is still going to work the same way. It is what it is. And I believe it's the same way with God. God doesn't cease to work just because I don't understand all the different things about God, or just because there are certain questions that I cannot answer about God. Let's take it a step further. We all know that there are some scientists who disagree with other scientists. And based on that, should we no longer believe in science if they can't all agree on how it works? We all know that when you start talking about God or teaching about God, there are disagreements. Some people believe this about God. Some people believe that about God. But just the fact that we have different beliefs about God, does that cause us not to believe in God? And I would make the argument no. Just like because there are two different scientists who disagree with each other, that doesn't mean that science doesn't exist or it's not real. It just means that they don't see eye to eye on how a certain aspect of science works. And I believe that happens as well in the, if you will, on the topic of God. Just because we don't see eye to eye on how God works doesn't stop God from working. I take it a step farther and say, ultimately, God is who he is, just like science is what it is. And it's going to continue to work whether we understand how it works, whether we're educated to understand how it works, or whether we believe in it or don't believe in it. If I stop believing in science, it doesn't stop science from working. If I stop believing in God, it doesn't stop God from working. It doesn't change God. My beliefs don't change God. My beliefs don't change science. It's a very similar thing. One more example. Do I stop using doctors simply because I can't explain all the details of how something works in medicine? You know, if I can't explain how a certain treatment makes it different or how that treatment works, should I not use the treatment? Should I not go to doctors because I can't explain or answer any question about medicine, sicknesses, diseases, or doctors? Of course not. That'd be silly. So I guess what I'm getting at is there are a lot of questions in life. And there's nothing wrong with seeking answers to those questions, but I think we got to be careful that we don't apply a different standard to God than what we apply to all the other areas of our life. So ultimately, whether you believe in a creator God or you do not believe in a creator God, both sides have questions that they cannot answer. And we want to talk about that as we go forward. Because both sides have questions that they cannot answer, both sides require a leap of faith. Whether you choose to believe in God requires a leap of faith to believe in God on some level. Whether you choose to believe there is no God, that also takes a leap of faith because there's evidence on both sides. And I believe there's actually more evidence to believe in a structured creator, a designer, that kind of thing. And we're going to talk about that throughout the balance of this podcast. I believe it actually takes more faith or a bigger leap of faith to become an atheist. By nature, everything tends to move from order or structure to disorder or chaos. How do I explain that in the real world? Let's say you go out in the middle of the woods and you build a cabin to live in. And you build this nice structure, this cabin. You got nice stuff in the cabin, nice furniture, whatever. And then you abandon that cabin. And nobody else goes to the cabin, and it's just left to nature. It's just going to be a matter of time till that cabin is going to start to deteriorate, and eventually it will disappear because of this second law of thermodynamics, that the structure, the order, always leads to disorder. Things tend to break down. They wear out. The natural impact of rain and weather on the building will start rotting it away. Certain bugs or termites or whatever will get into it. And it will eventually deteriorate and fall down. Now, what's that got to do with a belief in God or not a belief in God? So most atheists who don't believe in God believe in evolution, and that everything happened by random chance. That, there was a big bang 13.8 billion years ago, and from that big bang, the universe is now spreading outward, and everything that we know that exists today is a byproduct of that big bang, and life came from the big bang in some form or fashion. We'll talk about that a little later. And in my mind, we end up where we are based on random action after random action after random action after random action does not make sense, because the second law of thermodynamics is like the opposite of that. That things don't get better over time, they get worse over time. They don't fall together, they fall apart. Things don't become stronger, they deteriorate over time. If you have a fire, if you build a fire in a campfire, right, and you walk away from it and leave it, it's just a matter of time till that fire is going to burn out. And then it's going to cool off because of the second law of thermodynamics. So it seems like the teaching of evolution wants you to believe the exact opposite of what science teaches in the second law of thermodynamics. Now, that's not the only issue, but that's the first of many issues that I believe that science points towards a creator, a designer. Again, you can't prove that God exists. You can't put God in a test tube and measure him, but you also cannot prove that God does not exist. And by science, you can't prove either one. So it's not a question of proving that God exists or proving God doesn't exist, because neither is possible. The question is there more evidence to believe that there is a creator, a designer, or is there more evidence that there isn't a creator, designer? The second law of thermodynamics for me is item one in my evidence. Okay, number two would be the origins, the Big Bang, right? So most physicists and the physical sciences teach again that there was this Big Bang approximately 13.8 billion years ago. And everything that we know exists because of that. The obvious question becomes then, what went bang? Again, in our understanding of science, everything has a cause and effect. If something explodes, something causes the explosion. And so the question becomes, what caused the Big Bang? And what materials was it that exploded? Again, so the problem I have is twofold here. The first one is, again, according to science, you can't get something from nothing. Right? Nowhere in science can we get something from nothing. But that's exactly what they're wanting you to believe if the Big Bang is correct or true. So either there was something there before the Big Bang, and that's what exploded, or there was nothing there before the Big Bang, and all of a sudden something came from nothing, which in my mind does not make sense according to science. Okay, the second thing is, again, there has to be a cause for the explosion. What caused the explosion? What caused it to happen? Again, these are questions that they cannot fully answer. And so just like there are some things that we can't answer if you believe in God, there are things that they cannot answer if you choose to not believe in God. Okay, the next item or evidence in my mind in science is what's called the law of biogenesis, which state that life arises from pre-existing life, not from non-living material or matter. Life arises from pre-existing life. What does that mean? Well, obviously, if you see a bird in your backyard, that bird was born from an egg from a previous bird, right? That was born from an egg from a previous bird. That was born from an egg from a previous bird. And every bird comes from a previous bird, right? If you see a deer running around the backyard, at some point that deer was born from a mother doe, right? That had the baby. And that deer came from a mother doe, and that deer came from a mother doe. Life always comes from life. Life never just appears from nothing or from non-life. Again, this is the law of biogenesis. But again, we run into the same issue. Where did the first life come from? According to science, according to evolution. And we're back to the Big Bang again, where we get something came from nothing, which again doesn't make sense to my way of thinking from a scientific point of view. You can't get something from nothing. Life does not just appear. Life only comes from pre-existing life, again, according to the law of biogenesis. So again, from my way of thinking, science points to a creator, a designer on multiple levels. Let's take it a step further, okay? I believe that the complexity of our planet, of our universe, and our own human bodies points to a deliberate designer who not only created our universe, but even today sustains it. If you go back to episode 9 of the podcast, we spent quite a bit of time talking about this specific subject, and so I'm not going to go rehash all of that, but please go back and listen to episode 9 if you don't recall. But we talked about the ecosystem and how the ecosystem appears to be designed because it's so much is interwoven to where one thing impacts the other and one thing depends on the other. Like we breathe in oxygen and breathe out carbon dioxide, and trees breathe in carbon dioxide and breathe out oxygen, and how those kinds of things, right? How one thing's dependent upon the other. It's the circle of life kind of thing. We also talked about in that episode 9 the uniqueness of every person, and how, in my mind, that would be totally impossible to happen in a completely random environment, right? So again, evolution, the way it's taught, requires that there is no controlling person or factor or entity. It's all random. And as random things happen, if the random things make you stronger or smarter, then you have a greater survival rate. And so you keep those traits. If the random changes make you weaker or not as smart, then those animals get killed off. And so you end up with a stronger, smarter being over billions of years. But again, it's all random in theory. To me, there's no reason for a unique thumbprint in a random world. In other words, there are 8 billion people on the earth today, over 8 billion people, which means there's 8 billion thumbprints and not one single duplicate. And that's random? It doesn't make sense to me. It doesn't add up. In addition, we know that every single person on earth has unique DNA. So not only do you have a unique thumbprint, but you have unique DNA, so much so that they literally can use your DNA to prosecute you in a court of law. They can use your thumbprint to prosecute you in a court of law. They could not do that if there was any concern that there were duplicate thumbprints or duplicate DNA. In addition to that, each person has a unique eye scan, right? And that technology is being developed even as we speak. All of these things we talk about in more detail in episode 9. But again, all these things point to me to a designer versus a random circumstances. The idea that every single person ever born has a unique thumbprint, a unique DNA, a unique eye scan happening on accident or randomly is just mind-boggling. It doesn't make sense to me. It doesn't add up. And so here is another place where I think science points to a creator, a designer. Now there are 6 more things I want to share real quick. And there's going to be a little graphic up here. Now, I'm not going to be able to read everything that's on the graphic because there's just not enough time for that. But if you want to pause the video and read each of those, I think it would be beneficial because it gives you more information about each subject. But each one of these, again, are making the argument about the complexity of our planet, our universe, and our human bodies, all point to a deliberate designer who not only created the universe, but sustains it today. So let's start with item 1, the eye. The eye can distinguish among 7 million colors. It has automatic focusing and handles an outstanding 1.5 million messages simultaneously. So what's the point? The point is the human body is the most complex machine. We've been studying it for hundreds of years, and there's still a lot about it we don't understand. We are intentionally developing stuff, cameras, different things, and with our best scientists and with our best engineers, we still can't develop a machine as complex as the human body, and yet we're told to believe that our human body, this complex machine, happened on accident, randomly. It just doesn't add up. The Earth, its size is perfectly. If it was smaller or larger, we would cease to exist. Again, the Earth is located the precise location from the sun. If we were closer, we'd burn up. If we were farther away, we would freeze. It's almost like it was designed. Again, I just don't have enough faith to believe, to become an atheist. Again, all these different things in my mind are scientific reasons to believe in a God, to not believe in God, to be an atheist. It requires a leap of faith to believe in God. It requires a leap of faith to be an atheist. And I just don't have enough faith to be an atheist when I look at the science. The moon is the perfect size and distance from the Earth for its gravitational pull, impacting our oceans and tides and the movements of the ocean, preventing the ocean from becoming stagnant. Again, this is one of those things where it doesn't add up for me. Water is colorless, odorless, and without taste. And yet no living thing can survive without it. Our bodies are made up 2/3 of water, right? again, you got that intricate balance in who we are, how we're made, the human body, the way it works, our world, the moon, the universe. The human brain processes more than 1 million messages every second. The best computers in the world. Wow, they're getting pretty good. But again, the you know there may be computers that work better than the brain at this point, or at least in some areas. I'm not sure they can do everything we can, but keep in mind that every computer was built by someone who intentionally designed it, right? And that's kind of what the argument is in theory, for evolution to be true and correct, there is no intentionality there at all. There's no one controlling things. There's no one building upon better. You try 10 things and 9 of them are bad, so you do the 10th one because there's somebody in control of it, measuring everything and having an intentional goal. We want to get this as our goal, and so we work towards that goal. In theory, in evolution, there is no controlling interest. There is no intentionality. There is nothing but randomness. And yet, we're led to believe that our bodies, that this earth, that our universe, all these things just randomly happen. So many things that we take for granted have to be precisely as they are for life to exist. So at work last year, I hit 20 years at work. And because of that, I got this watch. It was a gift from my company, to which I am very appreciative of. But if I was to take this watch and open up the back and take the lens off the front and take all the parts out of this watch and completely disassemble this watch, take all those parts and put them in a bag and shake that bag for an hour, what are the odds that it would shake back together and make an operating, functioning watch again? Probably not. But what if I took that bag and shook it for a year? What are the odds that it would shake together and make a completely operational watch? And that's given that the parts are already made and in the bag. What if I took that bag and shook it for 13.8 billion years? Would it ever randomly come together and make an operational watch? No. We all know that. But we're led to believe that our human body, which is 1,000 times more complex than this watch, came together randomly. So the question is, in light of science, again, we can't prove there is a God. You can't prove there isn't a God using science. But there is a lot of evidence in science. And so the question becomes, is there more evidence for a creator designer, or is there more evidence that there's not a creator designer? And from my viewpoint, I believe that science points towards a creator. There is too much evidence in science for me to become an atheist. It would take too big of a leap of faith for me to try to ignore what I see in science, in nature. It just screams out that there is a cause. If there's an explosion, there's a cause for the explosion. If there's life, there's a creator for that life. Life doesn't come from anything. Something doesn't come from nothing. That kind of thing. Hopefully that all made sense to you. The reality is there are questions that we cannot answer. And there are difficulties that we go through in life that are very painful and suffering in our life. And I believe from my heart of hearts that God looks down on us and sees us in our suffering. And I believe literally that is the reason that Jesus Christ left heaven, gave up his royalty as God, but also gave up his omniscience, his omnipotence, his omnipresence temporarily for 33 years, came to earth, subjected himself to being wrapped up in the human form, and lived on this life was specifically because he sees and understands our sufferings. And maybe even better understands them because he did spend 33 years on this earth in a human form. So God does see your sufferings. He does see those difficult times you're going through. And although we may not be able to give you an answer that is satisfying to why those things happen or why that thing happened specifically to you, understand that your God does see those things, and that he does understand the pain and heartache that you're going through. Love you guys. Thank you so much for coming by and joining us today. And we will see you again next Monday. Adios.